Welcome to a discussion of typical male and female anatomy. Now, you may well already know all of this, or maybe you've heard it before, but it's kind of in one ear and out the other, or maybe, like me, you had a sex ed teacher who was so uncomfortable talking about this stuff that I'm really not sure I learned a single thing in my high school sex ed class. So, let's go over it again, even if you know it. So in the last video, we talked about the development of the external anatomy of the genitals. So in this one, we learned that up till 6 weeks post-fertilization, that all embryos are developing the same genitalia. But by week 7, they started to diverge into a male and a female anatomy. So we know that developmentally, they derive from the same tissues. So this will be a theme that runs throughout this video. This homology is the word. Homologous structures, because they, between men and women, between males and females, because they develop from homologous tissues. So they develop from this, they start from the same developmental process. They just end up looking a bit different, a little bit different. Let's look at male anatomy first. I specifically chose kind of the most unappealing anatomical drawing I could find, perhaps more for your amusement than anything else. But so what you can see here is a cross-section through the typical male adult, sexually mature anatomy. So you can see one leg on the other side, and then the front of the body to your left and the back of the body to the right. Notice there's the penis, and the penis in this image is flaccid, so this is not a sexually aroused individual. You'll notice that it has this cavernous body. The cavernous body is what's really important for penetration during sex. So during sexual stimulation, the cavernous body fills with blood, and this is what makes the penis stand erect and be stiff. Notice also that at the tip of the penis is what's called the glans penis, and then you have this foreskin that is around that. The foreskin, the scientific term for that is prepuce. So the prepuce that goes around and helps to protect the glans of the penis. There is the urethra, which is the tube that goes through the penis from the bladder, and it carries out the urine, and it does multiple things, because one, it helps, it releases the urine from the bladder, and so men urinate through that, but also this urethra is important for releasing sperm and ejaculating sperm at climax. So let's think a little bit about sperm. So the sperm develop in the scrotum. You can see the scrotum at the bottom of your screen. The interesting thing about the scrotum is that it is outside of the body cavity. And now, because it is outside the body cavity, it is 3 to 4 degrees cooler than body temperature. This is important because of what happens inside the scrotum. Inside the scrotum, you have the testes and the epididymis, and these are the two structures that are essential to creating sperm, to making and developing sperm. Spermatogenesis, the process of making sperm, takes about 75 days. The sperm first form in the testis, either of the testes. They stay there for about 55 days is that process, and then they move into the epididymis where they mature, and that maturation process takes about 20 days. An epididymis, I think of all anatomy and anatomical structures, epididymis is my most favorite word. Okay, so then we have the sperm have matured in the epididymis. So with each ejaculation, there are 50 million to 500 million sperm in each ejaculation. So there's a lot of work going on in the testes and the epididymis. So at the point of ejaculation, the sperm then travel up the vas deferens over the pubic bone, around the bladder, and then right before it starts to get to the prostate, it comes up to what's called the seminal vesicle. The seminal vesicle contributes about 60% of the semen volume. This is viscous and it contains fructose. The other super cool thing about the seminal vesicle is that it creates this yellow pigment that is also found in semen. And this yellow pigment has this really interesting capability where it fluoresces under ultraviolet radiation. So if you've ever watched these crime scene investigative shows on TV, they walk like CSI, the detectives, they walk into the room where there's some horrific crime, and they take the UV light and they shine it over the bed, and you see this glowing, fluorescence happening, and it's like, all over the walls and on the ceiling, and yeah, it's the seminal vesicle that creates makes the pigment that leads to that UV fluorescence that is so striking in these shows. Okay, so that's what the seminal vesicle does. And so then the sperm met up with the seminal vesicle, and they have that fluid there. So about more than 60% now we have of the ejaculate, and then it goes into the prostate gland. The prostate gland encircles the urethra just below the bladder. This is why when men later in life may have problems with their prostate gland, they also have problem urinating. Okay, so it encircles the urethra just below the bladder, and the prostate gland produces about 1/3 of the semen volume, and it's producing this milky fluid that enhances sperm motility. So what happens is when semen is ejaculated, first it is kind of this gooey clump, and then it becomes much more liquid. It's the prostate gland that produces the aspect of the semen that has that ability. And this is important because when the ejaculate first goes into the vagina, having it all go as like this one goopy mass helps to get as much of the semen as possible high up into the female anatomy. But then that liquefaction that happens is important for releasing the sperm and facilitating their motility and their ability to swim. So before the semen leaves the prostate gland, a really important thing happens. So remember, we talked about the urethra and how urine passes through the urethra. Okay, well, you do not want your semen intermixing with some leftover urine from the last time the guy peed, right? Okay, so what happens is that the Cowper's gland comes into play. Cowper's gland produces the pre-ejaculate that cleanses the urethra and clears the way before the semen is ejaculated. So there's that. There's male reproductive anatomy for you. I want to point out something really interesting that happens with this anatomical structure. Notice how you have the scrotum with the testes and the epididymis hanging below the body, so you have this scrotal sac. Notice that the vas deferens then has to travel up and over that pubic bone. Now that means that the vas deferens actually has to go through the tissues that hold all of the internal organs inside the body. So it creates this hole into through those tissues. And so what happens then is that you have this hernia risk, this inguinal hernia risk, because the vas deferens has to travel through through that part of the body. And so then men are at a much higher risk of having internal structures kind of protrude through that foramen. So why is that? So developmentally, some really kind of bizarro thing happens, which leads to there being this this need for the vas deferens to protrude through the body cavity. So let's go back into earlier development. So before a male is born. So you can see here a diagram that shows you where the kidneys are and the bladder. You can see the ureter that connects the kidney to the bladder. And sketched with the dotted line is the original position of the testes, up close to where the kidneys are. Prior to birth, during the development of these anatomical structures, you have this descent of the testes, and this usually happens before birth. Sometimes it doesn't, but usually it'll happen within the first 6 months after birth. But sometimes some surgery is needed to descend the testes from that position. From that position up between the kidneys, and then over the pubic bone and down into what will become the scrotum. So this is kind of just a bizarre thing that, if you think about evolution happening, that this is not a great design. It's really compromises that body cavity wall. And so if you were going to design this from scratch, you would actually have your vas deferens not have to make this giant journey over the pubic bone. So the interesting thing about this testes descent is that not all animals do this. So, for example, if you look at elephants, you can see that the author here has sketched the placement of these different anatomical structures kind of on the outside of the elephant, so you can get a sense of size, and you can also get a sense of placement inside their body. And you can see the enormous penis that the bull elephant has, but they're really big animals, so Now look at that diagram, and you can see KI is for kidney, TE is for testes, BLA is for bladder, and then there's a blow up of that, and you can see where the seminal vesicle and the prostrate and Cowper's gland meet up with the vas deferens from the testes, and it's just this really kind of simple path from up inside the body down towards the penis, and then through the urethra to ejaculation. So elephants do not have that inguinal hernia risk that you see in humans. Now, primates are unusual in that they not only descend the testes, but they actually do it before birth, typically. And all primates, as far as I understand it, do this. Some of the anatomy that's associated with testes descent is really spectacular. So I wanted to show you these vervet monkeys. They have testes descent, and they have this amazingly bright pigmentation. So the scrotum is actually blue, and the penis is that bright red, and just spectacular monkeys, huh? Other animals do this testes that do have that scrotal sac that hangs below the body. So, for example, you can also see a pretty dramatic testes descent and outside of the body scrotal sac in kangaroos. The thinking is that 3 to 4 degrees cooler temperature that happens outside of the body, which would be even greater in kangaroos, for example, is because it helps to protect the sperm while they're being stored. So men who wear underwear that holds the scrotum pretty tight up close to their body, they actually have a lower sperm count than men who wear more loose-fitting clothes. They've also found that men who have a job that requires them to, say, sit in the car and drive all day, they will have lower sperm counts. Men who ride a bike a lot will have lower sperm counts. It was even tried that to put men in like thermal underwear that would kind of heat up the scrotum. They tried to do this as as birth control, because if you keep the scrotum closer to the body and you warm up the scrotal sac by, just like maybe two degrees, that it really decreases sperm counts. But it takes about maybe 3 to 5 weeks of that warmer scrotal sac to hinder sperm formation. But then also, you can easily reverse it. You just stop heating up the scrotal sac, and then within about 3 to 5 weeks, and the sperm count goes up. And it's actually been found that for some men who have some trouble with infertility and their sperm counts, is that you can heat up the scrotal sac for a few weeks and then cool it back off, and that actually sperm counts can go up even more. So kind of an interesting aside to all of that. So now that we've talked about male anatomy, let's think about female anatomy. Okay, so when I saw this picture of these panties, this underwear, I was like, oh my gosh, this is just amazing. I must have this picture. Because it's really neat to be able to see kind of the placement of these anatomical structures on the body, like what we saw with that elephant. It's really helpful to see things like that. But one of the things about this that just drives me bonkers is that this diagram shows this cavernous opening of the uterus and this cavernous opening of the vagina. So the vagina is not just an open hole waiting to be filled in women as they're walking around. No, it's closed. There's not this cavern there. So some anatomical issues with this. So let's go to our similarly displeasing diagram here, similar to the male one we were just looking at. So let's talk through some of this anatomy. Remember, much of this is going to be really similar. You'll see amazingly similar themes, just a bit different. It's a different version of the same thing because early in development, they were the same. At 6 weeks of development, males and females are the same. So here we have the bladder in the middle of the picture. You can see where the pubic bone is. You can see where the buttocks and the rectum are. So again, the orientation is the same. So the front of the body is to your left and the back of the body is to the right, and it's a cross-section through. And so there's the bladder, the pubic bone. You have the ovary. So remember where the testes were prior to that testes descent. They were up near the kidneys. And the ovaries are found higher up in the body, similarly to where the testes were prior to descent. So the ovary is the equivalent of the testes, being gonads. The oviduct is similar to the vas deferens in that it is the pathway through which the gametes, through the egg cells, travel to get to the uterus. So oviduct, fallopian tubes, synonymous. So then you have the uterus, and then the cervix is that opening between the uterus and the vagina. The vagina is the opening that leads to the outside of the body in which the penis is inserted during copulation. So now focus your attention on that lower part of the female genitalia. You have the clitoris, which is indicated as a small structure there. Behind that is the urethra. The urethra is where urine is released from the bladder. So clitoris, urethra, and then there is the vagina. So notice that the urethra and the vagina are not the same opening. So the female anatomy releases urine not through the vagina. They're two separate things. And the clitoris is something separate from that as well. And then the rectum, where feces are released from the body, that's a separate opening as well. So you have these three openings and then the clitoris. So 3 distinct structures. Oh, and also I wanted to remind you of a term that's not labeled on this, and this is the fimbria. And the fimbria are those finger-like structures between the oviduct and the ovary. So the ovary is not actually attached to the oviduct, and we'll talk about this later, but the egg cells are released from the ovary, and these fimbria are the ones that produce this motion that kind kind of draws the egg cell into the oviduct properly. One of the things that I think is really important to know in terms of using proper anatomical terms is what to call the external female genitalia. So there are these two structures that help to protect the openings to the urethra and the vagina, and that protect the clitoris. You have the labia minor, and then you have the labia major over top of that. And sometimes the labia minor is actually protrudes a little bit further out from the labia major, and sometimes it's completely tucked inside. There's a lot of variation in that between women. But what do you call this? So often people like make reference to the female vagina as if vagina is the proper term for all of this external genitalia. So I would like you to notice that the vagina is actually inside the body. The vagina is not the labia. So if you didn't want to call it the labia major and you didn't want to use the labia minor, or perhaps you just want to refer to the entire structure, there is a word for this, and that word is vulva. So vulva is external female genitalia. So don't get caught like when somebody makes reference to like, hey, what do I call this stuff? You'd be like, the vulva. So, oh, did you injure your vulva? Not did you injure your vagina. Injuring your vagina is something very separate from injuring your external genitalia. Okay, now that we have that settled and my pet peeve is past, let's do some comparative anatomy. So the perineum is the term for that lower pelvic structure. So here you're looking at a male and a female pelvis. You can imagine that these people are actually laying on a table in front of you and their head is away from you, and you're looking between their legs, and so their belly up and their back is down. And so obviously removed all of the external skin and things like that, so you can get a sense of these structures and how they compare. So female is at the top and male is at the bottom. First off, whoa, how similar? Yes, how similar, because they were exactly the same 6 weeks post-fertilization, and then they started to diverge. So these are all homologous structures. So notice the placement of the clitoris for the female, and then the urethral orifice, and then the vaginal orifice, and then you have that perineal membrane there, and then you've got all of this musculature and the anal aperture, or the anus, which is the sphincter that leads to the rectum. The male is basically the same, except that instead of it being a clitoris and the clitoral gland at the tip of it, you have the penis and the glands of the penis. But also notice that instead of the urethra being a separate orifice, what's happened in male anatomy is that urethra during development has joined into that penis, and so that the urethra is then encompassed into the penis, and then the orifice for that is typically right at the tip of the glands of the penis. But it is not uncommon for that fusion of the urethra into that underside of the penis to not be completed by the time of birth, and so you will see some boy babies actually need some surgery to complete that process of incorporating the urethra into the penis, so that then he is not urinating from underneath the penis, but actually urinating through the tip of the penis. Let's look at this in another view. So I have another picture here for you. So comparative anatomy of external genitalia. So this image has the skin over top of that. So you can see what the outer anatomical structures look like as well. So you can see the labia minor, the labia major of the vulva, and you can see the scrotum and the penis there. So this is the same view that we were looking at in the last slide, but with different anatomical structures highlighted, so you can see the more superficial ones there. So one of the other things to notice that's different is that that distance between the anus and the urethra is different in males and females, and so that distance increases during male development, in contrast to the female anatomical arrangement there. So I'd like to now focus a bit more on the similarity between the clitoris and also the penis. So again, homologous structures because they started out in development exactly the same. So different versions of the same structure. So the clitoris has been discovered in Western medicine and forgotten and rediscovered multiple times. It wasn't actually until 2005 when an Australian urologist named Helen O'Connell used microdissection of cadavers and MRI technology to specifically focus in on and figure out what the clitoris looks like. Now, the word clitoris, I have read, I don't actually know Greek, so I don't know for sure if this is true, but I've read that it translates from the Greek to meaning little hill or to rub, which might be kind of a funny play on words that they were doing, if that's actually the right translation. Well, the clitoris is not actually a little hill at all. It's actually just the tip of a much larger anatomical structure that is inside of the female body. Whereas in the male body, you have the whole penis external to the abdomen. For the female, it is tucked inside, but it is quite a spectacular structure. So for about a good 9 centimeters, you have this extension of the corpus cavernosum. So this is that same type of spongy tissue that you find in the penis that becomes engorged with blood during sexual excitement that makes the penis erect. Similarly, when someone with a clitoris is sexually aroused, this structure becomes engorged with blood as well, and so you have a similar kind of erectile situation going on. It's just happening inside the body, and it just looks like such a small structure because just the glands of the clitoris is actually exposed in the vulvar region. Okay, so with that overview of anatomy in mind, we'll come to an end for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully much to think about.